Welcome, everyone. I am Lauren Lynch. I am the Director of College Advising. I have been in this field for about 20 years, so have helped hundreds of thousands of kids through this process, which you think might have been helpful when my own two were going through the process. And I will say that it was not quite as helpful as I would have wished. When we talk about parenting in the college admission process, I think a lot of the conversation has to be about how parents manage being parents in the college admission process. We all know that as our children are getting ready to head out the door, we're trying to teach them independence and initiative and valuable life skills, which includes potentially letting things not turn out as smoothly for them as we would wish. So tonight, our goal is just to share with you some perspectives and insights and to be sure to answer any questions you have. We will probably talk for about 30 minutes and then leave as much time as possible for questions. So if you have questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A as we continue through the program this evening. And I'm just going to ask our two lovely parents to introduce themselves. Mauricio, would you like to go first?
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Mauricio. Myself and my wife, Anna, we are from Brazil. We were educated there. So it's been, we went through the experience with our daughters for the first time. We have two daughters. The eldest, she graduated. So she started the process. Well, she graduated in high school in 2020. And she went to Penn. She's at Penn, actually. And our youngest daughter, Joanna, just graduated in 2023 and is just starting. She's a freshman at BC.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. Colleen.
Hi, Colleen Kishore. My three kids all went through, I'm from Greenwich, went through Greenwich Public Schools, and our oldest, Anisha, graduated from Notre Dame in this past May, and she's now out on her own and working with the job. Our second daughter, Anjali, is in the School of Arts and Sciences at Penn. She's a junior, and our son, Arjun, is a freshman at Penn as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and perspective and experience a little bit. My first question, I realize, might have very different answers for each of your children. So I will invite you to respond to this in the best way you see fit. But I guess, Colleen, I'll start with you. What were you most anxious about as you were approaching the college application process?
Our oldest daughter actually had a really tough freshman year in high school. And so her grades, her scores, everything were not indicative. Like she had to ramp up. And she did, and she was doing great. But you always worry that she was ramping a little late. And she was very, very focused. She was very focused on teaching. She wanted to be a teacher. And then at the very end, switched. And so we had only ever looked at teaching schools. Daughter number two was, she was very laser focused on Penn from the get-go. And it was during COVID. And she had done a summer program there, and that was all she ever wanted. And so she was very laser focused on that. And thankfully it worked. She did early decision, and thankfully it worked out for her. And my son, my concerns were really just getting him off the couch to do his applications.
I think that is going to be a very familiar sentiment for many of the parents watching this evening. Mm-hmm. And I think it really raises the question with each of Colleen's kids, something that we probably experience, the child who's laser focused and diligent and just on top of it and can't be swayed, versus the student who's more unfocused and hard to get them engaged with the process at all. Mauricio, what was your experience with this? What were the things that for you and your wife were the most anxiety provoking during this process?
Yeah, I would say that the first thing that got us very anxious is, as I said before, it's been our first experience. So we had no, knowledge about how the process, obviously we knew just like the big picture, but as some of you are going to see, if you haven't seen yet, it's a very, very complex process with a lot of moving pieces. So what we were more anxious about at the beginning was, again, the complexity, the fact that we didn't know how the process worked. And second, obviously, this kind of obvious, which is, I mean, with the outcome, we're very anxious about the outcome, because the outcome is, there's some randomness on this, because you can know for sure what's going to happen. And even the choices are difficult. I mean, when we are starting this, I mean, there are very good options. So, I mean, you have to think about the city, you have to think about the school, right? There's so many moving pieces. And obviously, ultimately, you don't know if the child is going to be accepted or not, So the outcome was something that we were obviously very concerned about. The experience with our eldest was similar to Colin's, in the sense she's super focused, very good academic performance. And since the very early days of the process, she was very sure she wanted pen, which obviously is very hard. So her anxiety was more because, I mean, her dream, and she was very focused on that, was it was hard to achieve. And our youngest daughter, I would say that we were probably even more, I mean, anxious, because throughout her academic life, she has had some learning difficulties, and later on, she's been diagnosed with ADHD. She had to go through a process, and Logic Prep helped us a lot in this process, actually, with a very good advice about how we should handle this. And but fortunately, everything, and we, similar to our eldest, she had a very clear goal in her mind when she visited Boston College. And it wasn't that, I mean, at all, wasn't easy at all for her. But so hopefully we've been successful in both processes. But again, each child is different in a way. But in our case, there are so many reasons to be anxious. But the good news is that ultimately the whole system, in our point of view, makes sense, right? So there's a lot of anxiety, but if we're going to talk about that later, probably. But if you have good advice and you participate as a family, I mean, there's a lot of anxiety, but there's a logic to everything.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think one of the things that I always talk about with students and families very early on in the process is that up to this point in life, there are a fair number of things that our children have had control over. If you work hard in school, you might get these grades. If you practice hard, you're going to get on the team. And the college application process is inherently stressful for students and families, because ultimately some of these decisions are absolutely outside of your control. For all of the qualified students who are admitted to these schools, there are thousands of qualified students who are not admitted. And it's hard to understand sometimes what goes into those decisions, and how that process unfolds. And so I do think that part of being a parent in this process is really taking responsibility for managing your own anxiety, and understanding that your children are already overwhelmed and deeply anxious in their own right, and that it's up to us as parents to kind of manage our anxiety a little bit better, so we're not passing that on to them as well. And that's hard to do, especially when they have their heart set on something that might ultimately not work out for them. It's a very painful process in some ways. Mauricio, what surprised you most about either the application process or about your experience with your child during that process?
Yeah, I think, and to your point is very good. I think a big part that myself and my wife we played was to support a lot, but to provide, how can I say, to provide to help reduce anxiety, because it's very anxious for all of us, right? So we're obviously anxious, but we're trying very hard not to increase the anxiety of the child. So what I would say that surprised, not necessarily surprised, but I have learned throughout the process, is that it's indeed very complex and it's a lot of work. It's not something that you should, I mean, again, as our background coming from Brazil, we haven't participated on that before, but it's a lot of work, not only to get the grades, but to prepare your story. And then when you file and when you apply, there's so many applications, even though you go through Common App, which is some sort of a common application for many of the schools here. You have specific questions about each specific school, and so it's a very overwhelming process. And our daughters, both of them, they had IB system in their high school, so it was even more work for them, you know. So I think that I wouldn't say the surprise, but what I have learned throughout the process is that indeed there are so many moving parts that it demands, again, in our case, what I think has been important in the process has been that we took this as a family project. Sometimes, again, I think it's so complex that if possible, obviously it's not possible for all the families, but if it's possible to have parents participating to help navigate it, and to have help, good advisors, I think it's really, really important, because it's a big effort.
Yeah, thank you. Colleen, I'm curious.
Now we did a very different tack where it was very much on the student. And we had discovered that when mom and dad got involved, all we did was add to the anxiety. And so both my husband and I, you know, we really weren't helping the situation. And so it was very much kind of stepping away. And also, because we had 3 kids so close together, we didn't want to poison the water for number 2 with what happened with number 1. And it was a very it was very specifically individual for each kid.
Oh.
And so we tried to really you know, obviously there's a learning curve for everybody. And so by the time we got to number 3, you know, I knew exactly how to handle the high school guidance office, and you don't know that with number 1. So that adds to the anxiety. But it's kind of letting your kid take the lead, I think.
Yeah.
And that is mom and dad think they know what's going on, but the whole world has changed entirely. The college application world has changed entirely since we did it. So while we went through it, we don't know this current process.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think when I reflect on my kind of professional experience and my process, it was abundantly clear to me in working with all of my students that every student is unique and different and has a different process and has a different journey. Yet somehow it surprised me with my own children that each of them handled the experience very differently. And I think, kind of speaking to both of your points, it becomes very important to know what your resources are, working with your Logic Prep college advisor, working with that trusted small group, trying to shut out all of the kind of outside noise and make that safe space for your children to be successful and for your family to get through this process successfully, which can feel challenging at times. I guess on that note, Colleen, I'm curious, is there advice? I mean, obviously, again, this might have changed over the years with you. Is there something you wish someone had given you, told you, or explained to you about the process in terms of managing it with your kids that you wish you'd heard before they began?
Just shut up. That was the biggest thing, is just shut up. Your kid doesn't want to hear about it. And one of the best pieces of advice my sister had given me was just, particularly mom and dad, and you tell your kid whatever is going on in this process stays in the family. That we don't need to discuss who gets in where, who is applying where, what your competition is, because you don't know what somebody's application looks like. And so much of it is so random. So, just shut up. Let them guide the process.
That's great advice. I think one of the things an older, wiser friend had told me, and I share with families a fair bit, is that as you get further and further into the process, it can consume every moment, every dinner conversation, every drive to school in the morning, and that it becomes very important to kind of set aside time to have conversations about college and then make it really clear that outside of those times, you are not talking about college. You're talking about anything else that's going on in the family or in the world other than college, because there are a lot of important things beyond that.
Well, particularly at the dinner table, my son was in what, sixth grade when we started this with Anisha. He would have had, like 8 full years of that. So you just go, stop.
Right.
Like, we can't do
Right.
this as a family.
Mauricio, is there advice you wish someone had given you?
Yeah, I think, and I think this conversation is very interesting because it shows that, again, each family is different and each each kid is different. But I think what has the common ground, listen to what you have been saying, is that I think one of the main roles that we have maybe to provide some sort of sometimes it's getting closer, sometimes it may be getting far from it, but providing some level of, I would say, a safety net in the process, because again, the kids and the parents, right? So I think ultimately the main thing is to provide some sort of calm in the process. In our case, what I think would be like good advice in our experience would be to trust the advice. Select. It's important to have criteria to select your advisors, but once you select them, listen to them. Because in our case, all our advisors, the school advisors and the logic prep team that we work with, they know what they're doing. They have done this many times. As you said, Lauren, maybe you helped hundreds of thousands of kids, many schools. So what I tell to my friends is that, again, select the good advisors, but once you have them, listen to them, because I would say that I had some opinions along the way based on my common sense that in retrospect, I think they would have been bad, let's say, opinions. But I think I listened to Olivia, I listened to Murilo very much. And even though I say, you know what, it doesn't make, I wouldn't follow this path, but I trust them because they know better than I do about the process. So I think in our case, it has been very important.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I'm curious, and again, understanding that the children are different, but were there things, and I guess I'll maybe ask one of you the question one way and one of you the question the other way, but what in your mind, Colleen, was kind of the most or the least helpful thing, the most and perhaps the least helpful thing you did for your children during this process?
I think one of the biggest things was going to see colleges by themselves, one-on-one. Like I said, we have 3 kids that are all pretty tight in age, but are very, very different and have very different wants and needs and desires. And it's recognizing that it's their life, it's their process, and it's who they want to be. So I think the biggest plus was just someone had told me, just like, you got to take a step back and you just got to, it's not helpful to get more anxious. It's not helpful to compare notes. Like, you have one older friend who you might be able to have, you have no kids in common that maybe you compare notes with, but do not play into one-upping each other or saying this kid got in, but I know my kid's grades are better. That's the kind of like competition, for lack of a better term, is just, that's the worst thing that you can get into.
Yeah. That absolutely makes a lot of sense. And I think that also speaks to some of the mythology around this process. It is very complex. And, Mauricio, you were saying that neither of you were educated in the US. And I think even for people who were, it's a very opaque process. It's hard to know there's published data, and yes, there are metrics that we know are used in making these evaluations, but it's
Mhm.
not a scientific act. It is a human process and a human experience. I think one of the things that I usually am pretty firm with families is exactly as you're saying, Colleen, to try to be very disciplined about shutting out all that noise. You can easily spend hours a day reading endless blog posts about everyone's expertise or thoughts about this or that. And I think you have to choose wisely who you want to get information from and who you want to share information from as well. I actually was curious what my kids' response to this question would be, and they both laughed when I asked what the most helpful thing I had done in the process was. And interestingly, my son, who is younger, his answer was that I encouraged him to work with his big sister. They're very close. She's a phenomenal writer. And to him, the most helpful and useful thing in the world is, as both of you are saying, for me to kind of step back and trust him to find that place, that person that was going to help him feel successful in this process. And, for most people, it is the college advisor. Mauricio, what do you think were the most helpful or unhelpful things you did for your children in this process, you or your wife?
Yeah, I think what, again, in different formats than in Colleen's case was, but ultimately, I think ultimately is providing, helping to reduce the anxiety level.
Mhm.
I think that's very important because the experience that we had, again, our daughters studied at an American school in São Paulo, and what we have seen, not necessarily with our daughters, both of them. I mean, the eldest daughter has always been very competitive, very driven. The youngest one wasn't. But what we have learned is that the system, when it approaches the admission process, is a very competitive one. Just like Colleen said, it's hard, because everybody talks about that. What's your ACT score? So I think that one of the most important, and each family is going to have its way to do it, but it's to provide us some sort of a safety net in the sense, listen, you have to do your work, which is very important. But I think in this sense, the system helps because there's a lot of competition and pressure in the system, I guess. But again, in some cases, it's going to be, okay, you feel better being by yourself, or you feel better with some support. I think that's what's been helpful in our cases. I mean, obviously you should ask them instead of us, but I think if you ask them, I think both of them felt that we helped to reduce the anxiety level for them. It's going to be great if you are accepted at this college, but there are other options, and one option is going to work well. We never know.
Right.
If the first one is the best one, maybe the second one is even better. So I think we helped in this sense, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful technique. And I can say definitively, and I know Olivia and parents and every college advisor out there will say that, for every student who gets into their first or second choice college, there are students who don't. And once you get over that grief, and I think it is grief, I, with very rare exception, have had students thrive where they've ended up, and have even had students come back to me and say, I'm so glad I didn't get into this college or that college. I'm exactly where I need to be. And I do think that can really help with anxiety, to just kind of, as a parent, have that certainty that your child is going to thrive where they land, and hopefully they kind of pick up on that as well. For both of you, I'm curious, and we're so grateful that you worked with Logic Prep throughout this process. For us, we really, to us, it is crucially important that we are supporting the entire student and the entire family. And what I mean by that is we are keenly aware that this is an increasingly stressful world and an increasingly uncertain world, and our students are facing mental health crises at tremendous rates. This process is just one of many kind of trials around growing up that we feel very honored to be a part of, and really privileged to work with students and families on successful negotiation of this complicated process. What do you think were some of the most useful tools and resources that working with Logic Prep allowed you as a family to get through this?
Mauricio?
Okay, I think in our case was, again, a sense for us that you as a team, you have a deep understanding of the process, and then we felt supported, that our questions and our doubts and all the advice, because again, for us, you provided a lot of advice. For instance, at some point very early in the process, maybe the beginning of her junior year, it was after COVID, and we were kind of, one of the concerns was that there's so many moving pieces, and so there's a lot of work. You have to work on the grades, you have to work on some, let's say, side project, you have to work on ACT, you have to so many angles that the child has to work on. And then we came to Murilo, which is the leader of Logic Prep in Brazil, and I was thinking about maybe it's better eventually to take test optional, because in our year we could do that. And very early on, he said, you know what? Forget the tests. Let's focus on the IB scores, and let's focus on essays and do it like this. So if we didn't have that type of advice, I would be somehow hesitant to say, you know what, should we do that or not? And then we ask, okay, so if she applies without, let's say, ACT or SAT, is this going to be bad for her? No, take it easy. I know what I'm talking about. You can follow this path, and then we could jump to another subject, So I think in a series of, small advices that ultimately I think that helped a lot in the process and helped us and what I can say, probably we have been talking a lot about how stressful this is, right? But if I could share a little bit of a different angle for our families, for both our daughters. Obviously, there was a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. But to be honest, we all also had a piece of fun, because a piece of joy, let's put it this way, not necessarily fun, but a piece of joy, Listen, this is something fun. You're talking about going to a great place to have a great experience. You're going to meet new people, and the entire process, there are some interesting things about it. You're going to grow up. I think both our daughters grew up a lot when they wrote the essays. So anyway, of course, there's a lot of maybe some people who are in the first experiences here, they may be thinking, okay, this is so stressful. Yes, but on the other hand, at least in our families, in our family, there was pressure, but there was a good part of it. We liked to do the college tours together. We liked to talk about it here and there. So I think we could combine, and Murilo has been important in this sense as well. Our eldest daughter, she was doing all the preparation for the tests, and the kids in her school, they liked to go to Logic Prep. There was a group there that they hanged out together. So I think it's again, there's a lot of stress, but in our experiences, at least, there was a lot of joy in the process as well, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful reminder to really kind of seek out those nice moments, whether it's taking your one child in a very busy family schedule to do a college tour and really focusing on that experience, Colleen, like you were talking about, and having fun and building that community. Colleen, for you, what were some of the tools and resources that you found most helpful in the work with Logic Prep?
I think it was just the pure seamlessness of it that I really we worked with Marjorie in the Armonk office, and it being able to say, go talk to Marjorie about this. That knowing it gave our kids each a sense of independence, that they didn't, that mommy wasn't or daddy wasn't breathing down their necks.
Mhm.
And that I could of course call Marjorie and prime the pump and say, this is what I'm worried about. And Marjorie would just, she had the whole process managed. And so I didn't have, so it ratcheted down my anxiety, ratcheted down the kids' anxiety, and they really had an advocate in the process. They had their own advisor, they had their own advocate in the process.
Yeah.
Daughter number one wanted us to look at her essays as she wrote them and the different iterations. Daughter number two wrote her essay, I think the day before it was due. She had been working with her essay coach all summer long, and then I'm going to say 10 days before it was due, she said, I don't like it, I'm throwing it out, and rewrote an essay that was perfect. It was so much better than what she had worked on. And working, I would have lost my marbles, but Marjorie was like, let her do it. She's going to do it. And my son, basically Marjorie just being able to offload it and have them have a sense of independence and ownership, but me and my husband knowing that there is an adult in the room. That was the biggest part for me.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I think that one thing that is very hard for parents in this process is to recognize and really kind of take in the importance of children taking ownership, exercising their initiative. One of the frustrations, I think, I will be very honest from the college advising perspective, is we can and will fully engage with this work and with the student. It is our passion. We do it with joy. And we need the student to show up and bring that, personality and that intent and that to be willing to engage equally in the process. And I think it's challenging for parents to recognize this is the time for me to step back and maybe go talk to the advisor separately about the things I'm worried about, but really let my child exercise some independence. I mean, as parents in this process, I think part of the anxiety is you want the best outcome for your children. You also recognize how pivotal this is. You are literally preparing your child to leave home. And that's a very bittersweet experience. And I think it can be very easy to stay a little too on top of the process, and tremendously valuable to hear both of you talk about letting your kids kind of self-identify and take the ownership and really be active in this process as well. I want to leave as much time as possible. I see we have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and then we also had a few questions in that were sent in previously. We have a question here. Is it helpful or counterproductive to hire a college counselor or consultant? We're concerned that our child won't cooperate or like being told what to do. But without the guidance, we're not sure we can make the best decisions. Curious what each of you think about that question.
It worked for us.
Go ahead.
I mean, it worked for us, and we were very lost. And both my husband and I attended college in the U.S. and are at the tail end of very large families ourselves. So we had spouses. I mean, we had nieces and nephews who had gone through the process. For us, it just made sense. And so I don't think it's a good decision for everybody, depending on how you buy into the process. But if you're going to do it, do it. If you're not going to do it, don't do it. Like you can't do it halfway.
I think that's great advice. And for those of you who are watching this, whose children are younger, in my mind, I say this not to add to any hysteria around the process, but if you have the opportunity to engage with a college counselor earlier in the process, I think it really offsets some of the tension and anxiety because you are well prepared. you know, I think that when Mauricio's talking about all of these moving pieces, when you have families coming to us kind of in the fall of senior year, and there are things that maybe could have been done differently, had we had the opportunity to work with them a little bit earlier. I think there is a lot of benefit in just building that very strong foundation, having the confidence to know that you're moving in the right direction and have all of the building blocks that you need. Mauricio, did you have a different response or thought
No,
about
similar.
that?
In our case, it's been super important. Obviously, we don't know how it would have worked because we don't have like a counter example. But for us, the entire process was much more, it helped us again to see a joy in it, as I said, you know, because it relieved a lot of the pressure. And we felt ultimately what I think that we felt looking at our daughters, we think that they did their part, you know, which is good. Ultimately, you know what? I think we hired the people that we should have hired. They did their part. We did our part that we thought was important. And again, there's a lot of randomness in the process, but having good advice for us was critical, very helpful.
Yeah. The next question actually is directed to you, but I think you know, I'll answer part of it because it is kind of more a logistic question, and it is, what is the importance of IB grades to get into Penn? Is there an official minimum IB to get into an Ivy? Um, I I will let you kind of talk about your experience with your girls. Typically, in the college application process, the first thing that colleges are looking at is a student's grades and their curriculum, meaning how well has the student done and how challenging is their curriculum. And the IB is universally known as probably the most challenging curriculum. IB and AP are very similar, but IB is extremely intense. Typically, Penn and other Ivies are looking for kind of a 37 plus with IB. Colleges are looking at the whole application. If your academics open the door, the rest of the application does get evaluated very carefully. And I guess I'm curious, kind of for both of you, maybe one way to help answer this question is to talk a little bit about, for your kids, what do you think were the strengths that the characteristics that might have come through in the application, in their essays or in their activities that might have helped make those translate the good academics into an acceptance?
My oldest daughter is a very scrappy, like her life. Like she's just a very scrappy, she is a really hard worker. And that is, you know, she was young for her grade, she's tiny, she's really, so that was kind of her, that's really what came through. And daughter number two, she's just a really good laser focused student. She's a phenomenal writer. She's a musician and athlete. And my son is just kind of a quirky kid. And I think that his quirkiness came through. You know, his interests are very outside of what one would consider mainstream. And I think that came through a lot. And I think I think those were really interesting qualities for all three of them.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
In the case of our eldest, she is, I think, let me put it in a different way. I think that in both cases, what I think worked well was that I think obviously in retrospect, with the benefit of the hindsight, that they chose as their top choices schools that not necessarily because, okay, so Harvard is great, Stanford is phenomenal, you know, but eventually Stanford is not for me, or Harvard is not for me, or Notre Dame is not for me, you know. I think they have been very effective at identifying were the really good schools for them as they are. So I think that the strengths that they showed, I think, is to combine obviously a good academic performance, because that's very important, you know. So part of the pressure is deserved, because you need to show a good degree of achievement there. But most importantly, I think that both of their applications were very, I would say, and legitimately very, I would say, sharp, the profile of Penn in my eldest one, and BC in our youngest one. You know, BC, we went there, she studied, I mean, understood what the soul of the university is, you know, and it was really indeed a very good fit for her. And I think she could, in the application, show, obviously with help of you guys, Olivia has been really, really helpful on this, to show that, you know what, I mean, the main strength is that the profile indeed makes sense to the school, you know.
I am really glad you brought that up, and Colleen, hearing about the differences in your students, and Mauricio, hearing you talk about that fit between the student and the college. I cannot stress enough how important that is. And we do have students who come in with colleges on their list that they can't really explain why they're there. And maybe they're there because mom and dad want them to be there, or they've heard they're great schools. But you know, in this process, I mean, you're looking for a certain IB, of course, but the college is looking, they're looking for reasons to accept students. And the more a student can do in this process to communicate why they are impassioned about that school, why that school is the right fit for them, and why they are the right fit for that school, that can translate really good academics into an admission and an ideal college acceptance. Really, I think, you know, one of the benefits of working with logic prep essay coaches and college advisors is that it is our job and our pleasure to really help students identify those passions, those stories, the quirkiness or the athleticism, or, you know, the thing that is going to become ultimately a compelling and important part of the application process. And so I think, you know, anything students can do to communicate that becomes really important. I think, I guess just, I mean, we're kind of running out of time, and I guess I would just close with one question for each of you. If you could do it over again, is there anything you would do differently, or anything you would suggest to someone else, you know, parting words of advice, either in hindsight for yourself or for families coming into this process?
So let
I
me
think the
start now.
biggest thing, go ahead,
I'm
go ahead,
sorry.
Mauricio.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think the biggest thing is your kid's going to land, and they're going to land somewhere fine, and they're going to do fine, but there's going to be bumps along the way. And, you know, every one of my kids, when they hit college, has had a bump, like some significant bumps. And you just want them to, and so part of this process is about trust and getting them to learn how to trust themselves, and knowing that, you know, families trust them, the school trusts them. And so, um, is every school a good fit for every kid? No. And just to say, you know, you choose it, and then you're going to see what's going to happen. And the school that you get rejected from might be the school that wouldn't be a good fit for you anyhow. I think it comes down to trust, and to the kids growing up, and to mom and dad being able to let them go.
I
And
completely agree.
for us, Logic Prep really helped with that process, because we were able to give the kids a longer leash, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. What I would say is that first and foremost, I mean, if we were to do it again, or talk to some of our friends about it, again, probably number one thing is be an agent to reduce the pressure in the system, you know.
Mhm.
Try very hard not to be the opposite, because it's already a lot of pressure. So try to reduce the pressure and eventually to bring some joy in it, you know. Each family is going to help do that one way, but I think this is important. But most importantly, what you were describing, and obviously we're biased because our experience has been that they were accepted to their top choices. But now, from the perspective that we have, looking at them and looking at their friends, you know, and looking at the crowd, we have a very strong view that they are places that they belong, you know, this is their crowd. So I think this is an illustration. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect for everyone, but I think that in general, there's a lot of logic in the system, and it's complex, so on and so forth, but there's a lot of logic. So I think that the schools, in most of the cases, they get to choose the people that really are going to belong there and are going to have a good experience, you know. So in this sense, important to, for instance, to prepare and to be true to yourself, you know. So you know what, eventually maybe it's not, you may write a perfect essay about the story that you come up with a story, but if it doesn't represent the kid, eventually the kid may be selected to a wrong school, you know. So in both our cases, I think that you helped us a lot about this, which was to, you know what, it has to represent the people that are doing that, and trust the system, that the system's going to select. Obviously do your part, do the best that you can, but never trying to pretend that you're something that you're not, you know. Have to be true to ourselves and trust the system.
And recognize it's 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's only 4 years, and it's easy to make hyperbole of how, like, this is, yes, it is life changing. It is the first time your kids have chosen where they want to go and who their people are, but it's 4 years.
Yeah.
And
I
just
think,
one last thing,
yeah,
about precisely about this point. The day that of the announcement of Penn, I remember it was December 16th. And then we knew it would happen. I think in Brazil was 9:30 p.m. We all knew about it. Obviously, we were all very anxious about it. So throughout the day, I was writing a letter to my daughter, but that I would hand it to her only if she wasn't approved, you know. But saying precisely this, you know what? Maybe today, for the kid and eventually for a part of the family, it seems like everything is related to that, you know, your acceptance or not, right? Obviously, this is important. You have to do your part, as we were saying, you know, get good advice, work hard, study hard. But it's just one event and one decision in your long life. There's going to be so many other choices and options. This is just a small part, important.
mhm.
But don't take it as the most important thing. And if for some reason you're not accepted to your dream school, your life is going to end. No, it's not like this, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. And I know we'd had some questions come in before the webinar about, you know, how do you decide early decision schools and early action, and how do you know you know, the best way to strategize around that? And I would say definitely talk with your college advisor. Let us help you do that. Um, each of our panelists, I think, have done both of our panelists have done a really great job, and helping us understand truly that every child is different. So with some kids, they're going to want you to look over their applications before they're submitted. With other kids, they're going to be adamant that they don't want you involved. And I think learning to understand and respect those differences, as Colleen's talking about, really having trust in the process, trust in your logic prep advisor, and most importantly, trust in your children who are learning how to be grown-ups and learning how to negotiate disappointments and challenges and joys, and hopefully learning how to do all of that gracefully with your guidance and support, I think is really the greatest gift we can give our kids before they head out the door to college.